Well, hey, this is Josh with What's on Disney Plus, and I get to have a kind of a special conversation here with my friend Gabriel. We've done this once before, and kind of on the theme of stories matter, which Gabriel has some expertise in that. He is a graduate of Kennesaw State University. Gabriel, tell us a little bit about your degree and background, if you could.
Sure. My graduate studies program was American Studies to be specific. So getting a master's of American Studies. American Studies deals with the very concept of America. It asks questions like, what does America mean, from its foundations historically to the sociological meanings behind American culture, um, philosophical, cultural studies, and of course, things in regards to education. And just to be clear, when I talk about what does America mean, some people, they may need to be given a lot of clarity on that. So America includes the Americas, not just the United States of America, but all North, South, and Central America. So
That is helpful. And so Gabriel is a historian and is obviously often teaching, educating on these issues of, very broadly. I think certainly though on issues of race, representation, et cetera. And that was our earlier conversation. He's also a big comics fan, and he knows this world of comics much better than I do. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about a couple different subjects. One is the new series, of course, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, deals with race issues and representation in a really interesting way. I've got my Captain America mug here to as symbol. But that's a great I think it's going to be a great jumping off point for us to start a good conversation as well. On the back end of this, we want to get into the film Soul, of course, Pixar's latest, and one that is up for several Academy Awards. Award season here we're in right now, and another film that deals heavily with these issues of race and representation. So, Gabriel, to start us off, just to, hey, jump into the story full force of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who do you think the power broker is in this story?
there have been so many fan theories I've seen about it. I've seen people say it has to be Sharon Carter, and to be truthful, I'm kind of leaning toward that right now. I wasn't originally, but some things did dawn on me. Now in the comics, the power broker is a male figure, and he has a very extensive history. I never really cared for him that much, but the way that Winter Soldier and Falcon has pivoted the show has had me intrigued. The reason why I think it's Sharon Carter is because there's no way she has access, though she's hiding out of Majorport. There's no way she has that much access to stuff without having some significant ties to people. Without going into spoiler territory, I'm assuming everyone here has watched the show. I hope you have. So with that being said, when they're having a fight between the people that want the super soldier serum and her people, Sam Wilson, Bucky, and the brilliance of Baron Zemo. She tells him that, she wishes him well and hopes to ask, Sam Wilson for a pardon. But then she tells her chauffeur, we got a couple of problems, and gets in the car. Well, but I was like, what's that about? Then they need satellites. And she just happens to have access to. I keep thinking, you're a little bit too comfortable.
Yeah,
You're a little too comfortable.
there's a lot of clues there. I think you're right. That's definitely who I'm leaning towards as well. But we don't know. So this is, of course, recorded here after episode 4, 5, and 6 are yet to come. So we'll see. And it's interesting how the first 2 episodes in the series really, I feel like, elevated and brought forward these issues of race and inclusion in a really direct way. I guess really the first 3 episodes, I should say. Because there were some interesting scenes with his family in Louisiana. There was this applying for a loan, etc. And then the next episode following that, couple of different scenes in there. I thought an interesting thing that might actually be a preview maybe of the finale, where you had a young, his interaction with the boy on the street and that whole situation. I'm sure you found that intriguing. As well as the police interaction there too. What have you thought about how they've kind of brought forward these issues of race and representation?
The show has done a brilliant job of bringing the points forward. I will be candid in saying I've also had to brace myself for some of the critiques that have come up from people in regards to how the show has discussed the intersections of race and inclusion. I've seen people say, well, it was so stupid to have a show where, you're talking about a superhero unable to get a loan when I heard that, I said the reason it's stupid to you is because you haven't lived this experience out in America. But for the vast majority of Black Americans who have experienced denials um, on loans, it's a problem. I have friends who also worked in the realtor industry. They were Black, and they noticed that they, even when it came to credit, they saw people of color being treated vastly different once they were seen physically. And if you didn't know who they were and it was assumed to be white, you were given more opportunities for better for celebration and having your word believed. So when I saw uh, Sam Wilson and his sister struggling, I thought that's real. That's close to home. Not just It's not just storytelling at that point to say you can save the world and still be treated as a Black man in America, suspiciously. With the kids scene also, where they
He calls him. He's like, "Oh, it's the Black Falcon," and he's like, "It's just Falcon." Uh, how did that strike you? That a commentary on?
I thought it was fun. I thought it was this good banter, because there's, I mean, growing up in communities like that, it's good to see people that still show a value for connecting with the residents. It really is powerful when you just see everyday people going back and forth. I know there was an intention of wit in that sense to say, why does it have to be Black Falcon as opposed to Falcon? I just thought to me, it hit me differently because um, even him going back and forth with the kid reminded me of things that I grew up with, where you were trained to be witty as a form of self-defense,
That's
and
really
to be able to be quick on your feet as a way to protect yourself.
See, the
So,
reason a think that calls forward a potential something we're going to see in the finale, which I think this is all leading towards, of course, the Falcon, Sam Wilson taking on the Shield. It would seem that that's the natural course of things. And, I think some people are going to refer to him potentially as the Black Captain America. And I think they're trying to point that out to say, there's no reason to add that modifier. It doesn't, that.
Yeah, he's either Captain America or he's not. And that's unfortunately, I don't have the comic in front of me. I just bought the comic, as far as the physical copy of it, the collector's volume, the graphic novel for Captain America when Sam Wilson took up the mantle. That came out in 2010, and I remember one of the critiques that people had. There were two different sides. One of the critiques said, how can Captain America be Black? And there were literally protests for people that kept up with the comic book industry. There were protests against having Captain America switch to becoming a Black character, and this was during the reign, the tenure of President Obama. And so it hit me seeing the open bigotry from people that claim to love comics. It doesn't surprise me because art has often been a way to either express awareness of racial reconciliation or to express bigotry, and it's never just comic books or storytelling. There are people behind those. There are people behind the screen. There are people in the comic book shop that hide their views pretty strongly and will look for opportunities to express them. So with Sam Wilson saying, being spoken of in a negative way, I wasn't shocked in 2010 when people said, well, he's not our Captain America. The other side of it said, the other argument that people brought up was that while people were protesting whether Captain America should even be Black, there were others that said, so is this going to be a long-term thing? Because if you make the new Captain America African American, it can't just be temporary for a year or so, and then you go back to Steve Rogers, because that defeats the entire purpose of whether or not we embrace change and that a Black person can be permanently Captain America. Then it becomes, oh, he was a Black Captain America for that season.
Right. That's really intriguing. Well, you obviously, have this knowledge of comics, and it is interesting that was only 10 years ago. I mean, I think sometimes there's a willingness to, among folks maybe who look like me, who have my background, which is conservative and from Texas and middle of the country. But, there's a willingness maybe to admit historic racism, and that, of course, slavery happened, and we know that the civil rights movement, but sometimes there's not always a willingness to look at current day issues and how oftentimes there are racial dimensions to still current problems and concerns in our society. one thing they did in that same episode was the character of Isaiah Bradley was introduced into it, which I know surprised and was a very exciting thing for many people. Obviously, a character who showed up in the Truth comic book, 2001 era. Did what did you think of that? And do you expect him perhaps to reappear in the next couple of episodes?
I'll be 100% real that it hit me pretty hard. Number one, because I have veterans in my family. My grandfather was a veteran in World War II. And we have other veterans in our family history who were brutalized. They were, they were lynched. And so growing up with that knowledge of elders in our family line who served our country and yet still experienced racial terrorism. Lynchings, by the way, don't just include, having someone be murdered by hanging or a noose. It should be clear that lynchings also include historically any form of violence to exterminate a Black person's life. It can be mob violence. It could be police, as it concerns cover-ups and police brutality. That's what happened in our family line. But for veterans who have gone through this history, Isaiah Bradley was very relevant. When I saw Captain America Endgame and saw Steve Rogers hand the shield to Sam Wilson, I cried like many other Black men in America. Not just because it was powerful to see a Black man given the mantle and one who rode deep with Steve Rogers. It was powerful because we carried that legacy of awareness of how Black soldiers and Black veterans have been historically treated. So when it comes to Isaiah Bradley, to see a Black Captain America who had been in the wings for a long time, but experimented on, hit home. Some people don't want to talk about that history. It is what it is, though. And I don't make any apologies for that. You can go to the Lynching Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, the Legacy Museum, National Memorial for Peace and Justice, where they talk about the history of racial terrorism. And they have several awesome books that talk about what Black veterans went through. They talk about what happened to Black veterans who had experimentations done upon them. Tuskegee, being a very famous example of the Tuskegee Syphilis Project. Isaiah Bradley, when I saw his story in the comics years ago, I remember watching Endgame and thinking, America is ready to have a Black Captain America. Don't just have Sam Wilson as the new Captain America. You need to discuss Isaiah Bradley. Because in the comics, I like where the show is going, but in the comics, actually, what happened is that after they made the serum for Steve Rogers, they couldn't replicate it. And not too long after, they experimented on at least 300 Black soldiers to try to replicate the serum that made Steve Rogers. All but 200, all but one out of 300, all but one survived the process. And that was Isaiah Bradley, who they then sent over to defeat Hitler. And at one point, he wasn't supposed to go on the mission, but he saw how they were replicating super soldier serum and weapons. He went over, beat the Nazis down, and saved the day. And America repaid him by locking him away. In the comics, he ends up getting, because the serum he got was an experimental serum, Isaiah Bradley in the comics ended up suffering from brain damage, and he couldn't be himself anymore. So for Black people reading what happened with this storyline, it was very close to home. That's what with this one, I'm really hoping, please keep that version of Isaiah Bradley where he's disgruntled, he's been abused, but he still has his wits. Because we need to have these conversations. I think America is ready to have these conversations as much as we have conversations of the Holocaust. We need to talk about what Black America has gone through. And it's not something that was only a long time ago. There are elders who have gone through this. So it's very relevant right now to talk about Isaiah Bradley. I'm so glad the show went there to bring his story to light and to really discuss practically that Black Americans and white Americans may watch the same movies and have different experiences. I know a lot of people, they love Captain America. They love Captain America. And they love talking about the legacy of American history and the revolution and freedom. But I know a lot of Black Americans who say, I love freedom too. And I know that for my ancestors and my elders, we lived in two different Americas.
And it's interesting because really the character of John Walker, in a sense, he gives you that mirror image in a sense of Captain America, Steve Rogers, that we've, that
Yeah.
maybe that's, sometimes almost that image that maybe other people have seen that, that maybe those of us who love American history, or again, maybe hold certain political views, etc., like to emphasize, the good of what occurred, but not always realizing that there were some difficult chapters as well. Do you now expect perhaps Isaiah Bradley to reappear, you think, in the finale?
I'm hoping for it. Again, they brought him up. I was like, you can't just bring that point up and then say, oh, we'll leave it alone. I think he will reappear, and I think that it's crucial for him to reappear, because he literally, what I really appreciate about the show thus far is that Isaiah Bradley, to me, he brings up more reason for why Sam Wilson did not want to pick up that shield. And as a Black American, I can say I understood it immediately when he was trying to tell Bucky, maybe this is something you and Steve can never understand, but can you admit that what I did because I believe it was right? For him, seeing what happened to Isaiah Bradley was a reflection of all the ways that America celebrated Captain America, but refused to acknowledge the experience of Americans who were Black, who were brown, and fought for the country, but would never get the basic respect that they were deserving of. So because Isaiah Bradley is an illustration of Sam Wilson's frustrations and his pain, I think it would be sensible for them to bring it back at some point.
Absolutely.
I mean, even now, you see how he was fighting, for those watching the show, you see how he was fighting over the fact that Bucky was chiding him for not taking up the shield and didn't even admit, well, there was a Black Captain America, and I didn't want to talk to you about it. But that's hypocrisy in the name of fighting for patriotism or fighting for ideals of freedom. But that's part of the conversation we should be having with the complexities of America. Am I making sense of what I'm saying right now?
Yeah. You know what I think about too, what may happen in the finale, like I think about the first episode with Rhodey and what a prominent role that he had. It could be almost that Isaiah Bradley will be played out as almost a mirror image of Rhodey and just
like
as
a mentor of sorts,
a mentor figure, but who has a very different mentality about how he's carrying himself and what he sees his role in the system. Maybe not to go along with everything, but in a sense, maybe buck against it to a degree. I want to ask about episode 4, which was so bold, and the way it ended, especially that scene, a level of brutality in a sense we've never seen in the MCU. And I know it could go a lot of directions in terms of how to comment on that, but I would say, particularly when you think about a scene that is being recorded on cell phone, of violence, I think the currency of that is very clear. What kind of imagery that they're trying to bring into the show. What is your thought on that?
I was not. No, I'm not gonna lie, because I studied the comics. That character, John Walker. Yeah, that's not my cap. And I think what got my attention, knowing the history of his character in the comics, what got my attention was that there's a difference between fighting for the greater good and fighting because of the good you feel that image will bring you. Everything about John Walker in the show has been about himself. I want to do something, and that suit makes me feel for the first time I'm doing something right. Not about whether or not you're doing it because America needs you to do certain things. It's not about walking in integrity. It's about his feelings. And throughout the series, he's been increasingly doing things demanding respect without earning respect just because he has a shield. So I was not surprised when he did exactly what he did in that act of brutality, because he's an image of, in my mind, patriotism that worships itself. He really thinks because he's a soldier and because he believes in freedom, he is without flaw. He doesn't realize that he has a danger in his attitude. And when he did what he did in the end, I was like, wow, y'all tarnished that shield for wow.
Literally, of course.
But wow, here we are. And I thought the entire time, Sam, the shield is yours. The shield is yours. Take the mantle back. because John Walker in the series reminded me of the danger of saying that you are worth celebration just because you say you're for the government. I think that's why when he did what he did, I thought, yeah, you were government selected to replace someone that stood on principle and even in grief, because he was a good man. He had restraint. He didn't seek out revenge. He even, like, if you remember in Civil War when he was fighting Tony Stark, at one point he picked up his shield and he held himself back because he had character and restraint.
That's
Even when he lost his best friend, Bucky, in the first Captain America movie, he didn't seek out the death of Hydra for his own sake. He still had a level of restraint.
Yep.
This guy, however, feels that anything goes, and he's inherently right. And that's why I think it's going to be interesting to see where it can go from here. I do agree with others that have said it could potentially go in two directions. One of which is maybe he realizes he was wrong and repents. But the most likely direction, number two, this other direction, is that he may even be sanctioned by the government that selected him, that studied him, that knew his profile, and as we found out, that knew he actually worked in Afghanistan doing some very dark and dirty things. They may turn a blind eye because he's completely compliant to them and is willing to do what they want. Steve would have said, no, I won't do that. But his character is blind loyalty, and might makes right.
Yeah, it does seem like they may very well be setting up something with General Thunderbolt Ross, something that's going to play out in a future series, in a future movie, in terms of the Thunderbolts and whatever role that John Walker, U.S. agent, may play in that. So, I think it'll be intriguing to see where they take it.
I was mad when I saw. I was like, bro, this. You've been talking about you Captain America the whole time. Cap would never do that. This is why you can never. It was never about you, and he made it completely about him and his ego. Like, having the shield means that I'm right. I'm like, no, it doesn't mean you're right.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
It's such an opposite feeling, really, to all of the Avengers that, back to 2012 Avengers, or even before that, like you say, Captain America First Avenger, there's an aspect of humility, maybe of even awareness of, like, I can fail. I have this power, but I've got, it's the whole, with great power comes great responsibility. Obviously, it's the Spider-Man, classic line. I think they always feel like they have to prove that, that they have to prove that they're worthy of actually holding that power and of being kind of mankind's protector. And we're seeing none of that, of course, with John Walker.
He's a good critique also for veterans, I think, because I thought it was interesting how he contrasted with Sam Wilson when it came to Sam Wilson being someone who deals with PTSD and grief counseling. So for Sam, he was willing to hear people out and to listen, not to rush in and to charge in guns blazing and basically have a shoot first, ask questions later mindset. John Walker, however, has been celebrated, even though he was celebrated as a soldier, because of his work, he's been celebrated really for him doing whatever he's asked to do and the violent things he had to do, he felt he had to do to get stuff done. And that's a completely, like, that whole scene with Carly, that bugged the mess out of me. I was like, he was literally talking to someone, Sam Wilson was talking to Carly, identifying with her struggle. As a black man who grew up with a sister who and they both felt that their stories they weren't respected in America. They were invisible. He could grieve and empathize with Carly, but Walker just busted right in the process of conversation. Didn't even wait the full time for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, had the gall to come in and demand that Sam and Bucky do whatever he wants. And I was like, no, this is the danger of not recognizing the responsibility of power that comes with the symbol you have.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, I think the series is bringing up a lot of interesting things, maybe almost too much, frankly. I mean, it has a lot going on. We have 2 episodes left. I know we're all excited to be watching what they do with it. So it's intriguing. I'm excited to see, and I do hope that they bring back Isaiah Bradley and, don't just kind of, in a sense, some of those race and representation issues were really brought forward in the first few episodes, and then haven't seen much of that in the last couple. So we'll see if they circle back. I would assume so, to kind of bring us some closure on some of the themes that they've brought up. and haven't really resolved. So
how we gonna honor Isaiah?
that's right,
Are we going to
exactly.
acknowledge him finally, or what? Because there's no super soldier serum without him, really.
That's exactly right. Well,
Yeah.
wanted to take a turn here to talk about Soul, which I think both of us really enjoyed, and is a film that I think will be studied for a long time, frankly, because I think that it has a lot going on in it. It's it's not a film for children at all. I think it really
Yeah.
might be the first Pixar film that isn't really at all for kids. Almost, I think 8 and under, or I know maybe there's some kids who probably enjoy the colors, but it's just there's a lot that is a lot more mature to it. And I think we always know that Pixar brings a high degree of technical excellence in what they do. Than other studios, especially the visuals and the music. I think that we often see that they have a higher degree of emotional intelligence as well in their films. There's always those heartstrings, the feelings, the emotions are always very present. But then I think this time around, I feel like they're also trying to bring in a degree of cultural intelligence that you just you don't see, particularly in an animated film. But when you talk about the kind of spaces they go into, whether it's a jazz club in New York City, barbershop, etc., there's an aspect of cultural intelligence as well that they're bringing to fore as well. What stands out to you about the film in terms of some big things that you liked about it and thought were working on all cylinders?
I really thought that it was cool seeing the ways that they tried to humanize everyday life from different parts of America, particularly in Black America, of course. One of my favorite scenes in that movie was in regards to going to the barbershop and seeing, I forget the name of the other character who essentially took over his body.
22.
Thank you, 22.
Yes, right.
I
So
love how she was fascinated with the roles that barbers played, um, and she was able to, through that conversation, help the main character realize that there was so much wonder and beauty in simple jobs that he may have thought weren't that important. And I grew up in the barbershops my entire life, and so um, it hit home seeing that scene. Because I've seen people say, "Well, you don't really, you want to ever you want to make sure you get a real job when you graduate from high school." And there are many people who are cutting hair and doing amazing with it and making money. To be clear, so to say, "Oh, this is to say it's not an important job," isn't really giving weight to the role. And this movie, I think, helped to show the different things in Black America that are worth celebrating. I also love seeing the ways that he, when 22 had control over his body, I love seeing the ways that 22 showed him how his work as a jazz teacher, as a music teacher, really, was critical, and that he was willing to overlook all of that to get a big gig instead of realizing how much life he's spoken to his students. I thought that was really beautiful.
It's so well said. It's interesting because you're in a sense countering what a lot of people don't like about the film. It's which is we talked last time about how Princess and the Frog has a unique issue when it comes to African American representation, where most of the film she's a frog in the movie, and so you're not really appreciating her as a black princess. And this is a common problem in a number of Spies in Disguise, which is a Blue Sky Studios movie released by Disney. Another issue where I think Will Smith's character is a pigeon or something the most of the film. So this is one where people have criticized that and said, well, Joe Gardner is not in his body for essentially maybe a third of the film he's in his body, a third of the film he's in the soul world where everybody's kind of disembodied, and then for a third of the movie he's in a cat, and 22 has switched bodies with him. But you're bringing forward the fact that the context of her learning from his experience and even drawing forward the value and the beauty of it. It can, in a sense, only happen if there was this body switching. What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to counter something real quickly because I think that for the storyline it works, and that essentially like trading spaces. Basically with them trading spaces, they were both able to help you to see the beauty of what each other brought, what they both had, and to encourage that. And I love that particular storyline dynamic. That being said, I'm not a fan, as you know, I'm not a fan of this common practice with Black fit characters in animated films only being present as their full selves for 5-10 minutes. And I do support that critique that says we can talk about African Americans in fairy tale, in storytelling, in powerful ways, but also traditional ways. Because as much as I love Soul, the thing that I guess still irks me a little bit is that, how can I say this? Let me put it like this. The thing that irks me a little bit is that if anything gets discussed with African American culture or Black culture, there's an assumption that we can't discuss it with them being, number one, humans for the majority of the film. And number two, we can't discuss it in a way where you can see, epic world building. There are so many parts of African history, and I stand by this in every conversation I have with people. There's so much with African folklore, African fairy tales alone, from which African American culture comes from. There's so much with the African American folklore, where we can tell stories with people being human and it still be magical without them having to be disembodied. And I think there's a resistance in Disney to talk about that. There's a strong resistance to talk about it. We still have Rapunzel with Tangled. We still have Elsa with the Ice Princess. I'm still waiting for the day where we can have a story that highlights the beauty of African American heritage, not just in the modern sense, but in a ancient sense. That'll be nice. Soul deals more so with, for some technically somewhat modern times, with jazz culture, and I really think jazz is amazing. But growing up with it, I also know that I love jazz music, but I want to see myself in some of these. I want to see people who like me in these fairy tales. Jazz, that's a practical thing.
So you might be familiar with this project that's coming up here called Iwaju. That is where Disney is, partnering with this Nigerian, animation firm. I think, and you're familiar with this.
No, actually, I'm not.
Oh, okay. So
that's good news. I'm like, thank you. Here we go. We just had The Last Dragon. Right. My point. I was like, okay, we went from thank God for Soul, but wait, we have a tale about I think Southeast Asian culture with Raya the Last Dragon, or that's the movie.
Right. Raya and the Last Dragon. You got
Thank you, Raya the Last Dragon. I was like, give me something in African culture real quick, and we can come back to Soul to balance it out. So with Nigerian fairy telling.
Yes, awesome. It's coming. It's coming. I think in the next couple of years here. But they basically, it's a really interesting story where these young kids, teenagers, I think out of Nigeria, said, "Oh, we're gonna, we're creating this comic book that is going to kick Disney's ass." I mean, that's literally how it came out this way as a story on the BBC and other places. And so, Walt Disney Feature Animation out of California actually reached out to them and were like, "Hey, we want to work with you guys." And so there is it was announced in December at the big investors thing when they announced literally, something like 50 different series that are coming. So it was in the mix of those things. Yeah. But they're partnering with this guys. There's going to be a show called Iwaju that'll be a long form series steeped in science fiction apparently, but very much rooted in African folklore and tradition. So should be right up your alley, I think. And there's also, by the way, a Tiana series coming that is going to, be further up on the Princess and the Frog, and I'm sure respond to that criticism that is there about, issues of representation in that. So,
the thing with Soul that was interesting, I love the concept. Again, good storytelling is good storytelling. So I love the concept of him learning how beautiful his work was and being reminded of how powerful jazz was. I love them talking about the history of jazz and the way that it spoke, not just to him, but to African Americans historically. In many ways, it felt like it kind of built up on some of the stuff that Princess and the Frog tried to touch on a little bit when it came to speaking about not culture in the bayou, speaking about New Orleans culture, you know. But the thing that was interesting with Soul was kind of sci-fi in some ways when it came to what they were talking about the afterlife. Some stuff I was like, this is okay. They're going into some theological territory right now, and this is interesting how they're describing it. I think it's cool. Maybe if they had just presented his body and his spirit in his human form, like show his full human body, but it would like, maybe change the color. It'll be like cool. It would fit a little more. But I thought it was still brilliant storytelling, honestly.
I think there's a lot more going on in it than meets the eye. I mean, you and I think have similar views as it comes to religion, et cetera, and spirituality issues. But I think, I actually listened to an interview with Pete Docter where he talked to some of the religious press about this film. And it was fascinating what he had to say, because he said, we're really trying to give people a crash course in philosophy with this movie. And you're like, wow, what is this? And he says, we start with essentialism, the idea that I was born to do this. And he says that's straight out of Aristotle or Plato. He's like, and then we counter that with the character of 22. And she just has this nihilism, the whole, everything is meaningless. There's nothing that matters. That's her whole mentality. And so you see these two worldviews of, essentialism versus the nihilism playing out between those two initially. And then really they land on kind of what you might call this hopeful existentialism, that all of life is spiritual. Everything you do contributes to who you are as a person and the overall meaning of your life. So I think people who want to criticize it on a theological standpoint, and there are people who've done that and say, oh, this goes off into territory that's not great. I don't.
There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I don't look to Pixar to for my theology. So don't do that for an animated film. I mean, definitely, I think he's Pete Docter, who is, I know he's very open about his Christian faith, but he also is not trying to, I don't think in any way evangelize or reflect that in this. But it is simply an open door to talk about some of these issues of afterlife and eternity and what might happen after death, etc. And he also consulted, of course, with Jewish scholars, with Islamic as well. And you can see certainly some of the New Age type ideas as well in there from some of the different shaman type character that was there. So I think I think that's why partly maybe I don't see it as a film for kids, unless you're going to have a lot of conversations with them, because these are a lot of big ideas that hopefully you as a parent, you as someone would want to have a conversation with. And Pete Docter is very clear about that from the beginning. Like, hey, this is about starting conversation with people, and you guys all kind of having that as you want to. But I see it essentially still as a buddy comedy. We think about, that's what Pixar is known for, is whether it's Mike and Sully, Marlin and Dory, Woody and Buzz. That's what we know Pixar for. And I think this is just simply Joe and 22 on their own kind of buddy comedy journey. And it's very different, and it's bold and creative. And I think particularly the music is wild in that they've got that futuristic kind of stuff going on in the soul world. And then they've got really amazing, jazz that is, this kind of all infusion of so many different eras of jazz, in a sense, that you have from John Batiste really leading when you come into New York City, what it sounds like there. So, they're on so many levels, lots to love about Soul. I hope it does great at the Oscars here coming up in a couple of weeks. And, I do hope people continue to check it out who haven't. And maybe folks who've, I don't know. I don't know why there's so much, I feel like, debate about this film, or like, I just think this is the worst. It's like, this is the first Pixar film with a Black protagonist. I mean, I think there's a lot to appreciate about it. And I think if, you're dismissing it out of hand, I would just maybe give it a second look. Would you have thoughts on that?
No, I agree 100%. I think that there are so many good things that have gone on for that film. And I think that's why it's definitely worth, I would say, check it out, because it definitely gets a lot of conversation. And I would say, while I don't recommend it for kids just to watch by themselves, I would actually say I think it's important for people to start having these conversations with their children, because the children today are being impacted by these things in the school systems. And, whether we like it or not, when you're old enough to ask a question, you're old enough to get an answer. I think that, the earlier we have these conversations about what do you believe the afterlife is like? What do you believe you're here for? What are the what are the answers to the 5 basic questions, as other theologians have said? Who made us? Why were we made? Um, where do we come from? Wow, I only know 3. It's 5. It's the 5 questions, like, what are you here for? What do who, what are you made for? I'm not gonna butcher it.
That's all right. You're fine. You're fine.
But basically, the answers to life's basic questions of who made us and why are we here? Where do we come from? Who determines what's right and what's wrong? These things, these conversations can't be put off until you're a teenager. And I like what places like Plugged In do, where they do reviews on movies, but they encourage people to sit down with their kids and to talk these concepts through. If you talk about Princess and the Frog, you're already being exposed to a religious worldview by default, even if it's a magical sense of what's going on. You're talking about voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up. And it was very in my face when I saw the film. I was like, this is a lot. Talking to your friends on the other side for a Disney movie. This is a lot. But I was glad that they had African Americans that said, well, here's what happened culturally, historically. And I think with this movie, since there were kids showcased in the movie, especially in the barbershops and working in the school systems, it'd be important to, at least for those who claim Christ, it'd be important for people to sit down and talk through, why this movie speaks to people so deeply when it comes to those questions of existence and knowing why we're here, because these things impact all of us.
Yeah.
And I know as a child, I didn't ask these questions until I was a teenager. I started asking this question at 6 years old.
So true.
What designed for? Is only one path to take in life?
Right.
Or we keep coming back to the same path like the movie talked about.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I do think there's sometimes a caginess about talking about religion in the public square and among friends, but I think if we can have a civil conversation and realize that there are people who have different views and different ways of seeing things, it's still fun. We can learn from each other. We can sharpen each other. So, but hey, Gabriel, I really appreciate the conversation. I think this has been tremendous. Really appreciate your expertise, and I know we'll be, like I say, watching, hoping this one does well, but also continuing to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I'm sure. Now, folks can find you on the Disney Plus group, right? Elsewhere as well. Is there a place to find you in terms of other social or Twitter? Or
look for me on Instagram, G Graves. What's my Instagram? Like G Graves 103, and also on Facebook, of course. Gabriel Adam. If anyone want to keep up with the work I do. Community of Reconcilers is another space if you want to find out about the work I do, reconciliation. We talk a lot about these conversations as well, including how storytelling is a means of reconciliation and how the stories we tell do have social impacts, whether we like them or not. Just to put this out there, people of African descent have had very deep spiritual views about this life and the life after. I know for me, in American studies, we talk about this often when it comes to the social impact of your religious views that no one can escape. We all have a worldview, and our worldview impacts how we see things. And so for me, and my faith in God being serious, I appreciate, these conversations and watching movies that allow me to have civil conversations about why we're here. And even if someone disagrees, it's important to be able to have these conversations about how our views do impact, the way we treat one another in everyday life, in daily situations. But that's way more than what you asked for. Go to G Graves 103 on Instagram or Community Reconcilers online on Facebook, and you'll find me.
So good. Well, thank you, Gabriel. This has been a great conversation. Again, I've been Josh with What's on Disney Plus. You can find us on what'sondisneyplus.com. And I know Roger and the team, of course, will be back here on a future episode of the podcast. So y'all have a great one. We'll be in touch.